Welcome to the Fierce and Fit Mentor Podcast. I'm your host, Clarice Yao, a holistic health coach dedicated to helping women over 40 achieve their fittest, fiercest selves. Each week, we'll dive deep into the unique challenges of menopause, including belly fat, weight gain, muscle building, hormonal imbalances, and more. These episodes are recorded live from my free Facebook group, Fierce Women Sculpting Powerful Bodies and Champion Mindsets. Be sure to check the link in the show notes to join our incredible community and access free content, challenges, and resources designed just for you. All right, so let's get going. So first of all, if you're new here, this is the Fierce Woman community, sculpting powerful bodies and champion mindsets. And I mentioned this earlier, but I really love doing these kinds of these lives just because I can do any topic of anything I want, whether it's macros, whether it's hormones, whether it's muscles. And I can tell that there's a large population here who really like sculpted muscles. Who here is like your dream is to be sculpted? Put it below. If you're like, I want to be sculpted, I want you to put sculpted below. Let's talk a little bit about what it means to be sculpted. Okay. So the first thing is to look at the definition of what it means to be sculpted. So sculpting, and according to the definition in the dictionary, is to form and shape and carve something into a deliberate shape. Usually with sculpting, it is with malleable things. So things like a clay, Play-Doh, or something soft that you can make it into something. And so I guess in terms of fitness, it's how do you make and create the muscle shape that you really want. So when people are saying they want to be sculpted, they're trying to manipulate their muscles into a certain shape, which is crazy because really we can do that. You can actually create shape in your body, and you are kind of made from clay. The reality is actually you are kind of made from clay, right? From the earth we come, to the earth we go back. So you are a piece of clay. And I often say I am the sculptor. So I sculpt and build and help people define their muscles because we have malleable parts in our body, like our muscle fibers, which we're going to talk more about. Okay. So the more defined your muscles are, the more sculpted you'll look. So if your muscles are more defined, you're going to look more sculpted. But here's the thing is what does more sculpted actually mean? And that's what this topic of today's live is all about. There's a lot of factors involved with it. So there's lots of factors that we need to break down. So the first aspect of someone looking sculpted is going to be percentage body fat, right? That is probably one of the primary ways you're going to be able to see sculpted muscles, okay? In order to see sculpted muscles, you have to have a low percentage body fat. If you have a high percentage body fat, you can have a lot of muscles, but you still won't look necessarily sculpted or shredded, right? So what I want to talk about here is I want to talk about some different terminologies that, we throw around so you have a better understanding of what it means and clarify your own interpretations and expectations of what you believe you're going to achieve, because it's not bam, I look at that model on magazine and I'm just going to get there, right? So let's talk about number one. So this number one is where I like to keep majority of my clients, and it's where I like to stay majority of the time, which is lean, right? Very lean looking, but not necessarily shredded. Okay. So lean and shredded is not the same. Okay. So what does lean actually mean? So lean is that you have relatively low to moderate percentage body fat. There isn't a whole lot of excess fat clinging off of you, but yeah, if you took your hand and pinched, you could pinch a little bit, right? That is normal. Right. So there's a little bit, but not very little, it's not much on your body, but you're just lean overall. And because you're lean overall, you have really great shape to your body. You can see nice shoulders. You can see really nice glutes. You see good shape. Okay. Like a general shape. Okay. And your body looks tight and toned. So that generally is what I would define as lean. Now, not every muscle is popping when you're lean. You have good shape, but not everything is
boom, popping in your face, right? And your abs would not necessarily, it'll usually be just a flat stomach, maybe with some like nice shadow in your stomach area, but it's not like, again, shredded like a six pack, right? It's just that nice toned look, right? Let's talk a little bit about looking toned, okay? Yeah, like, you can see very quickly if you look at a person's body, you're like, yeah, she's toned. You can tell it. You can't be toned, right? So let's talk about it. It's a colloquial term. You can't actually tone a muscle. Like you can't like make a muscle like all suddenly tone up. But actually what tone actually means is when the muscle is partially contracted. And the reason is that oftentimes when people are very active and they lift a lot of weights and stuff like that, they have kind of slightly contracted muscles a lot of time. Think about lats, your lat muscles in the back. When you're a competitor, if you have competed before, sometimes you walk around, you feel like you're spreading your lats, like without even thinking about it, because it's almost neurologically, there's a signal that your brain has been like activated, that it's kind of slightly held on to the tension. And that's not necessarily bad. You just have a very tight and toned up body because you're lifting weights. So, but really when we colloquial say toned body, we're just saying somebody looks like they have really firm muscles. You look at them and there's not a lot of jiggliness. They're just tight and toned, right? So in terms of this lean category, it is a little bit more sustainable. It's kind of where I like to sit, and I like to have most of my clients eventually, this is the stage I like them to get to, because I feel like it's a little bit more sustainable. It still takes a lot of intentional work. You have to be very conscious of what you eat. You have to exercise regularly, and you generally are pretty like on target to your health. But because this category doesn't require you to be so strict, it allows you to actually live life, allows you to have a little bit of fun, enjoy a couple fun foods. You can go on holidays and a little bit of this and that, and it's fine. You can still look overall healthy and fit and lean, okay? So the percentage body fat of a lean person, I would say, is generally between 18 to 22% body fat. Obviously, with anything below 20% starts being a little bit more difficult, but if you are, above 20, I think you can really sustain that as a lifestyle and still enjoy and have some fun. This is where I like to put most of my clients around that range, because I just feel like they can truly sustain for a long-term lifestyle, right? But, if some people want to get leaner into 19, 18%, that's fine as well. That is also possible. And you'll still look very like toned, and you might even see more muscle pop as you lean down towards like the 19, 18%, right? So yeah, it just depends where you are. Now, if you are like 23 to 26% body fat, you will look athletic, but you'll just be a little bit curvier, softer, right? Just a little bit softer. And so some of my clients are, 27, like they might start at 33% body fat, or a lot of women in menopause often start around like 32, 31, 30, 29% body fat. So a lot of times we can bring that down to maybe 25, 24. But remember, a lot of them are like, if you don't lower that further, you're still not going to see all the muscle you want. You're going to be just a bit curvier, but you can see the person has muscle, right? So obviously, if you want to drop that down, then you got to bring that down to the lean level, which I would consider between 18 to 22%. Okay. So this is kind of the first category. So let's describe some of the other categories. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you what you're striving for, right? So number 2 is the shredded or cut or ripped category. Now, this category is extremely low percentage fat for women, right? You would think anything below 18%, you're starting to get lower. And this is where you will see more muscles pop. Like if you guys the competition photo there that I had, I think I was about 17% body fat, maybe 16. I was not in a category where I went below that though, because I wasn't in bodybuilding, which is like crazy. But they want still that feminine look in fitness category. So I was about 17 or 16%. So when you are starting to like lean down for, let's say, competition, you'll see muscles start to pop. You'll see that shoulder, like you're like, whoa, I didn't know she had such big shoulders. Because before it's covered, right? Like it has even a slight layer of fat. It doesn't make your shoulders look as big, right? But as soon as you lean down, you're like, oh, she has a lot of shoulder muscles or a lot of arm muscles. Or there's a picture I posted of my back. And so that would be more like shredded and cut. When you see every individual muscle, like you see the trapezius, you see the rhomboids, you see the latissimus dorsi, you see all the muscles sculpted in there. That is a low fat percentage, okay? Which means you drop below 18%, and anywhere, I mean, depending on which competition level and how dialed you are, I would say between 14 to 18% is probably where you're going to see some really great pops in your muscle. At this level, you would see your six pack, and my competition photo I posted standing upright, but as soon as I let go, I have a picture of my six pack, right? Because in that low percentage fat, now everything pops. Everybody has a six pack, right? Everybody has a six pack, but is how much fat is covering your current six pack is the key. So the reason why I used my photo yesterday is to make a point, is that is a low percentage fat, my competition, right? So if you want to look like you're shredded or cut, you have to be willing to drop below 18% body fat, which is much harder. It is much harder. It's not usually sustainable. It takes extreme amount of focus and concentration. You do need to make it your life. And that's okay for a season, or if that's your competitor, it is your life. That's okay. If this is your goal and you're going for it, or you're going for your pro card, as a lot of the pros are doing, this is your life. That makes sense, right? Because you get better with every season, right? But it is a much harder stage to get to. It doesn't allow you a lot of room to move. You wouldn't be able to enjoy as much things that you usually enjoy. It's not really considered a lifestyle kind of position or stage of your life, but it's okay if that's where you want to be. It's just like somebody who competes for Olympics, right? That's not going to be the rest of their life, but in order to get to the Olympics, they are going to make that happen, right? So it's one of those things you want to understand, that if you want to be shredded and ripped and that kind of physique, you have to be willing to go all the way. Either you're going to do a competition, or you're going to really do some sort of photo shoot or some sort of thing that's going to get you there, because it's not your usual body's homeostasis balance. It's not where it wants to be. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And also one thing, okay, so shredded, cut, and ripped. And I would say they kind of are shredded and cut are kind of similar. I think ripped is at a even lower fat percentage. So when you're ripped, it's every movement you make, why they use the word ripped is your muscles are rippling, right? That's why it's called ripped. So it's probably that would be closer to probably 14% or something like that, where it's everything you do, you see the muscles just ripple across, right? So that's number two. And I'm going to ask all of you in a second what you want to be. Now, there is a third category, and this third category is open to interpretation, but there's a third category that is usually, and some of my clients even say this, they say, oh, I want to be jacked, right? And I've been called jacked at the gym before, but jacked is a very overall term. You could be lean and jacked, but in general, I feel when somebody says you're jacked, it's not necessarily you're lean or shredded. When you're jacked, it actually means that you have visibly large muscles compared to your frame or to your height, to your size. You have visibly large muscles. So people will say, oh, you have jacked arms, or you have jacked shoulders, or you have a jacked back, is when people can see visibly there's large muscle on you. So let's be clear. So if someone can be lean or even shredded and have slightly smaller muscles, and they can still look really, really good. But if you have fat on top of your muscle, covering your muscle, you need to have more muscle, more size to it if you want it to pop. So this is where I find if we look at, and don't get me wrong, man, some of these CrossFit athletes are phenomenal. Let me tell you, but a lot of times they look jacked, right? They're jacked because their size of their back or their size of their shoulders is just tremendous, right? And so when people say jacked, Often it's the size of the muscle, and often you can have a little bit more fat percentage on your body, and that's okay, because it's not about how lean and low percentage body fat you have. When you're jacked, it's about the size of the muscle. So that's why you can have somebody who is like maybe bulkier, but they can look jacked, but that's not necessarily cut or shredded, right? But maybe they can be if they go into the next season, right? So basically from one season to the next, someone could move if they understand how to, from being jacked because they're bulking or whatnot. Like a lot of the Olympians for competition, they may look jacked and there's a lot of size of them, there's more fat on them, and then they can move from jacked to lean to shredded to cut to ripped, right? Which can just like go on a continuum and spectrum, right? And in the stage of being jacked, it's a little bit more sustainable, right? Because you're allowed to have a little more fat on you. You can eat a little more carbs, you can eat a little bit more fats. You tend to eat a tiny bit more in surplus. It's a little bit nicer. You can eat a little bit more food, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's super easy. Those of you who have bulked before, or those of you who are on high caloric counts, there's the opposite problem, right? It's like, man, you're eating all the time. You're eating so much food, right? If you have competed any competitors in here, you might know what I mean. You're eating so much food, right? So it's an opposite problem. So if you've ever had to kind of like bulk or really try to gain a lot of muscle, it is easier to sustain, but it's not easy either. It's like you have to eat so much food that it's actually kind of hard, right? But in terms of like going from jacked to kind of all the other stages, kind of leaning out and all that, you have to know how to properly dial your nutrition. It's not just about eating more food. It's not just like, oh, eat more, right? You have to be very strategic on how you eat more food to gain the muscle. Not too much fat. You'll gain a little bit of fat because it's natural process. And then how you load your body and then deload your body is really important. And so, if you're talking about like physique competitors, loading and deloading, there's a specific strategy to how you do protein, carbs, and fat, and how you deload that as well, right? As well, being jacked is not easy peasy, because being jacked, you actually really have to push really, really hard in the gym, right? If you are in that stage of bulking phase, you're trying to build muscle, you're eating in surplus of this many calories, you want to use that surplus of calories to build muscle, right? So this would require a lot of hard work in the gym, a lot of progressive overloading, a lot of negatives, a lot of giant sets, a lot of like different training methodologies that's going to force the development of that muscle, right? But the stage of being jacked, I think, is a little bit more easy. Like people could stay there a little while. For people like ex-athletes or maybe power lifters who is okay with a little bit more bulk on them, they can stay there a long time. Whereas being shredded and cut, typically you can't stay there for a long time. So this is kind of where I say, like, I prefer personally, I like to stay in the lean stage and bring and teach most of my clients to get to the lean stage, which is 18% to 22% body fat, with 20 to 22 being the norm. Usually somebody has to have really, really good like food discipline and really work with me for a while to really drop that percentage below 20, because anything below 20 starts like working almost against your body, right? And so it takes more effort, more extra hard work to drop that lower, right? To drop 1% from, let's just say 18 to 17% is like extremely hard work. Like it may take you weeks and weeks and weeks to accomplish that one goal, a 1% drop, right? So that's why anything below 20, you really want a good strategy. You want to make sure you have a good program. You want to make sure your coach knows how to dial your nutrition well, and that there's time to do it. Something I always say, like, people want to rush. If you are someone who's like, I want to look jacked or I want to look shredded, and you have only been doing it for 5-6 months and you started at 20% body fat or 30 or 25, you have to give yourself time to make that happen, at least if you do it safely, in my opinion, right? You could do things that are a little bit crazy, but that's not the greatest, right? So I wanted to kind of describe these different phrases to you. There's one more, but it's for guys. Have you guys ever heard of the phrase, you're swole? Swole, SWOLE. Those are for the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and the Ronnie Coleman when they're huge. I don't think any girl wants to look swole, let me tell you. So my question to all of you who are watching is, so which category do you believe you want to sit into? You want to be lean? You want to be shredded, cut, or ripped? Or you want to be jacked? Which one do you want to sit in for yourself? So let's talk a little bit about the next category. Okay, so we said the number one thing of how you're going to look is percentage body fat in your body. Now, the next category is how big your muscles are, which is what I mentioned earlier, right? So if you drop your fat percentage, which, sometimes women in general will be like, a lot of, I think this era, not as much, maybe the era before, wants to get skinny, wants to lose weight, wants to, all of that. If you just lose weight, you'll know you just become skinny. And we've seen people who are just skin and bones, right? And that's not what we want. We don't want just skin and bones. So obviously it's not just fat percentage drop, but it is about building that good muscle development and the size of the muscle. And the more size of the muscle you have, the more you'll pop, obviously, right? But you can have size of muscle, but fat on top and not pop. So it has to be size of muscle plus low fat percentage together that creates the nice look and pop. Okay. So how do you accomplish this? Well, first of all, I did a muscle live about 2 weeks ago. We'll talk about that in a second. But in order to build muscle, you have to lift frequently and you have to lift heavy. Now, I'm not saying you have to lift at max 1 RM like a power lifter, but you do need to lift pretty heavy. So lift frequently and lift moderate to heavy weights where your muscles are always strained so it can produce more size. Now, there are different ways that your muscle fibers can increase, sacroplasmically or myofibrillary. In general, it's like you have to lift frequently and you have to lift heavy and use different progressive overload techniques, okay? The muscle building live I talked about 4 principles of training, which is specificity, individuality, variety, and progressive overload. So specificity is using exercises that targets specifically the goals you want to accomplish. So if you are a runner, then you should be training running drills, right? Specificity of your training to your goal, okay? If you are a football athlete, then you should be training wind sprints, these sprints down and coming back, wind sprints back and forth, right? So when it comes to bodybuilding, the specificity is that you need to be specifically isolating and targeting the muscle you want to build. And because that muscle needs to receive enough stimulus in order to create the muscle, right? So you have to be very specific to which muscle you hit. And I think I said this before, that really great bodybuilders, and especially like I in the gyms a lot, and I train with a lot of different guys and people who are bodybuilders as well, is like the more creative you can get with isolating a muscle, the more growth you get out of it. So sometimes we do the most crazy unconventional things because you're just like trying to isolate into that muscle and it doesn't look like a standard exercise, right? So if you're good at isolating and hitting down into that muscle, the more likely you'll build a great muscle base, right? So in terms of the programming then, so the way you need to program, so you need to make sure that if you are wanting to build muscle, that your programming has a very specific split programming in it. Usually the ones I design are all the split programming for my clients because I specifically want to target different muscles for them. There are different philosophies on it. You can also do push-pull, different varieties. I think that as you train and if you become a higher level athlete, you can experiment with more different types of training protocols. But for a beginner, for someone who hasn't really lifted weights that much, a really good split is good because then it allows you to hit every muscle individually, like chisel. Like I think about the chisel. You're chiseling every muscle and giving it enough time to rest because you have to give it enough spacing in between. So the programming is important because if you don't space your programs well, then rest is not proper. Then you end up not building the muscle you want. So you have to have the right rest in between plus the right splits, basically, right? And you want to make sure that your program, not only hits all the body parts, but it particularly targets your deficit point. Every person has a slightly different physique. It's your genetic protocol. And if you have a slightly different deficit, if you have a good coach, they will actually go in and build in your deficit, right? Oshone, I know she's not here today, but her legs were hard for her and her shoulders were super easy for her. So we had to really specifically program into her legs, but then she got feedback that her back wasn't good enough from the competition. So we really specifically then nailed in another program that would develop her back. And so like with every season, she competed 5 shows. We were like sculpting, right? We're like sculpting this part of her body, then sculpting this part of her body, then sculpting this part of her body. So if you have a good program, it will split program and hit into your deficit points, because then you will look more fully complete. That's the goal, right? If we want to look like a sculpted, like a sculpture, we want to really fill in the points that we really want, right? And one more thing is, bodybuilders tend to, I said this in my last live on the muscle live, is bodybuilders and our programming tend to have higher reps and higher sets. We tend to have a lot of reps and sets. Our volumes are really, really high because we want to create the myofibril tears that is going to create that muscle growth, right? So there's a lot of factors to making that muscle grow. And it's not just dropping fat percentage. So if you're someone who is really like training hard, but you're not really seeing the right muscle development, but you're trying to drop fat, but then you feel like you don't look good, could look not that great, right? Because you're just skinny now, right? So you really want to make sure you're building in the muscle and the size. So I want to ask all of you who are listening, how many do you feel like you're on a proper muscle sculpting program, or you're not? If you feel like you need a more proper muscle sculpting program, I want you to put muscle sculpting below. The other thing is to think about, in terms of those of you who are thinking about, well, is my program really muscle sculpting, or am I doing what I need to build muscle? The other thing you need to think about is, when you work out overall working out is not the same as hyper training a specific part of the body, right? Because if you overall work out, like, whether it's dance or Zumba or different kinds of group classes, and they may have target things that they're doing, but it still potentially may not be as targeted as you may want. Because if you're using a lot of big exercises, it will help. But in big exercises, your dominant muscle will always take over. And so you will tend to use the bigger muscles to do the moves. And then you really lose your workload in your small muscles and in all the little other fibers that need to be worked, right? So like, for example, a push press, that is from like maybe like CrossFit with your dumbbells, that's really a lot of it is using your legs, right? You can push up a lot of weight in a push press, which in CrossFit, that's the point, is to get up a lot of heavy weight and have high reps. But if you do that, you will have strong shoulders, you will, but you're not going to have a really good, well-defined, like direct shape to your shoulders, not as much as if you isolate a shoulder press. So this is why I say, like, not just any exercise, not any full body exercise. You really have to make sure you have specifics. And like I said, like CrossFitters are incredibly fit, but don't forget they do a lot of specific isolated ones too, outside of their CrossFit moves as well. Now, there are a few other factors involving muscle building. So you have to have proper programming and proper progressive overload. So like the programming and loading it and, moving it into a harder level. But the other parts of muscle building to get the shape that you need is proper nutrition and proper rest and recovery, right? So proper nutrition and proper rest and recovery. So proper nutrition, you can't get away from this, right? You could work till you're blue in the face. You can push so hard. You can have the perfect program. But if you don't fuel your body the right way, you're not going to build the muscle that you want, right? So you have to have sufficient protein, but I'm going to also say you have to have sufficient carbs and fat. I know that in the muscle building space, people talk about protein a lot, but I really believe like that it can't just be protein. If you are just overly focusing on protein, which I see this a lot with a lot of people, you're missing a lot of your concepts of like carbs and what builds the muscle, and fats, which actually help with your nutrient absorption, as well as the hormonal level of your body. If you are older, you particularly have to be more careful about the hormonal level of your body. So instead of thinking, okay, I need to build muscle and I just need protein, I really want you to think, I need to build muscle and I need to have proper protein, carbs, and fat. That ratio is very, very important. Now, how much protein you require is going to change based on what stage you are in for your body. Are you trying to cut? Are you trying to bulk? Are you trying to get jacked? Are you trying to stay lean? And also what body type you have, right? So this is why a lot of times people ask me, well, how much protein should I have? I don't really have a set answer for you because it depends on your body and your existing muscle base, your existing metabolism, and even like in the scientific literature, just so you know, there's a lot of debate. Like there's people saying as low as 0.8 grams per kilogram, to some people saying as high as 2.0 per grams per kilogram. There's such a huge range, right? So it's not like, I would be careful of going like, okay, I have to have this certain amount of protein without really understanding it. I would encourage you, if you are really wanting to learn how to build muscle, you really learn from a professional how much protein you need for your body with the right combination of carbs and fat. That is very, very important. And I would say like there is certain advantages, like some people naturally build muscle a little bit faster and some people don't. I think if you don't naturally build muscle faster, you may need to be even more diligent with your nutrition. Just like somebody who naturally has more fat on their body, you have to be more diligent with your nutrition, right? I guess one of the things with that is that with nutrition, you have to have good macros, right? So how many people here, if you feel like I work out so much, I go to the gym, I have good workout program, I have a good trainer, but you're still not seeing the muscle that you want, then that is potentially your nutrition. So, or your macros. So put macros or nutrition if you feel like maybe that's something I need to work more on. And maybe like you need to tweak some things, but maybe you don't, right? It depends on if you feel like your muscle is growing or not. Again, it comes down to low percentage fat and enough muscle size, which both comes into play with nutrition. Your nutrition has to be really, really good to bring your fat percentage down and to build a sufficient amount of muscle in place. And if you are going through phasing in your body, then you need it even more. So let's just say if you try to phase and you try to build more muscle and go more towards a higher fat percentage, like maybe more jacked or swole or whatever, and then you try to bring it back down, that kind of dialing requires a little bit more diligence with how you will move your proteins, your carbs, and your fat, right? So yes, put nutrition below if you feel like you need more guidance on nutrition. And another thing is a note about muscle building and inflammation. So again, if you're someone who's like, I'm not seeing as much muscle as I want, or you're struggling a little bit with like seeing the results you want, I talked a lot about this, that muscle building is very difficult under a highly inflamed state, right? If you have a lot of belly fat, or that even if you don't have a lot of belly fat, you don't have to have a lot of belly fat. You could just be inflamed. You can just be an inflamed person. That will really inhibit your ability to build muscle, because if your immune system is always under attack, like inflammation is basically attack, it basically is always in survival mode, and all its energy is going towards not only like your white blood cells, but also, like I said, your like in the muscle sculpting masterclass I talked about, your HPA axis, which is the production of DHEA. DHEA is one of the key hormones that women use to build muscle. That axis changes because of cortisol, right? So when it comes down to deciding which steroid hormone to produce, if you are under a high level of stress or inflammation, it's going to partition its energy to producing cortisol instead of estrogen and testosterone. So that division is where like you could be at a disadvantage, particularly if you want to build more muscle and you want to become jacked or swole, like all the things that you guys say. You want to be so like muscular, but you're not able to become that muscular, partially because you could be, I'm just saying you might be inflamed. You might be struggling with inflammation in your body. And then that really steals your ability to be able to build a large amount of muscle. Also, I had mentioned before the presence of estrogen. So why, if it steals your hormones to go produce cortisol versus estrogen and testosterone, women do not use testosterone that much. Like I said, testosterone is not as free floating and usable for women as it is for men. And so that men use a very different kind of hormonal system to build muscle. Women use a very different hormonal system for us, but you need estrogen because estrogen is very connected to obviously your fatigue, resistance of your muscle. You have better recovery. You can last longer in a lot of your reps, and you have better satellite cell activity. And all of this stuff, if you're like, I don't know what satellite cell is, I don't understand how it produces that. Again, that's also in the muscle sculpting masterclass, because that's actually where I show pictures and I show you what is going on with the satellite cell. But if you are extremely inflamed, this is where it kind of steals your muscle building potential. And if you're new to muscle building, you're going to have beginner gains, but then you're only going to get gains up to a certain point. Like you'll get gains and then you'll plateau, right? You won't keep going if you don't address some of these other things that may be in your system, or you're still inflaming, or there's inflammation. So this is why I talk about this for menopausal women a lot, because menopausal women, you guys have more struggle with inflammation, and then your hormones get out of whack, right? This is the reason I have the 21-day anti-inflammation course. This is meant to address that inflammation so you can reset your gut system, you can stop bloating, you can start dropping your belly fat, and then you start building more muscle. And then the last part of muscle building is proper rest and recovery. So this is not too much detail, but it's just a standard. If you want to build muscle, you can't just go hard in the gym and eat good, right? You got to go hard in the gym, eat good, and make sure you rest and get enough sleep. Have recovery days for your muscles. Make sure you're not working and overtraining them. I think women have a tendency to overtrain. So like from one day to the next day, they will do like a workout that hits the similar muscle, and then that could lead to overtraining, and then your muscle can't grow. Because it's like my fitness coach, my initial fitness coach always said, it's like you lay concrete down and it's not dry yet, and you go over and walk over the wet concrete. What's going to happen, guys? Your wet concrete just got ruined, right? You got to give your time for your muscles to re-solidify. So make sure you have a good program that really separates it properly and allows enough time for your muscles to become concrete so you can become sculpted, right? So making sure good recovery, and then making sure you don't overdo cardio as well. So you do need cardio. And particularly as you lean down fat percentage to drop below that 18%, like I mentioned, of course, you probably will need a little bit more cardio, but not overdoing your cardio, because you're overdoing your cardio can burn your muscle and create the stress response in your body that you don't want. However, there is a certain percentage you need of cardio, HIIT, and weight training that will depend on your current fat percentage, your body type, and your goal. So if you are already a lean individual, I will have very different cardio type recommendations for you than someone who is sitting at 25% body fat and who needs to work on their belly fat. I have different recommendations. So you don't want to overdo cardio so that you don't overstress your system and get the proper rest you need. So proper rest, I want you guys to think about, is like proper hormones, because without proper rest, your hormones do go out of whack. And, I know that Clarice knows this because sometimes I lack sleep, and I'm very aware when my hormones are a little out of whack. So, you want to have a greater muscle building potential, make sure you get enough rest and recovery. And so if you feel like you get enough rest and recovery, that's good. If you feel like you don't, put more rest and recovery below. We might be able to send you one. It's a long time ago. I did a rest and recovery live. That was like almost a year or more ago. But yeah, so if you feel like you need better rest and recovery, you can also put rest and recovery there. All right. So we are running through this fast. Third factor to your muscle building, sculpting, shredding, all of this type of stuff. So number one is low fat percentage. Number two is building enough size on your muscle so that it can create the right shape. So it's the combination of the two. And then the third thing is there is actual legitimate genetic factors that you have to consider. So three things I'm going to talk about is fiber length, fiber types, and body types. These all affect what your ultimate look will be. Okay. So let's start first actually with body types. So obviously every person has a little bit of a different genetic coding on what their natural set point is for fat. This is genetically predetermined, and you can thank your mom and dad for this. So some people have naturally lower fat percentage set points, and some people naturally have higher fat percentage set points. Okay. And obviously, some of you may know the different terms for this. There is endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorphs, right? Different body types. So endomorphs are the rounder types, and their natural set point is a little bit more fat on their body. And typically they have bigger bones as well. If you look at their bone structure, they're a little bit bigger boned as well. They do have to work a little bit harder to control fat in their body. And then ectomorphs are naturally very, very, very lean, tall, long limbs, and they look usually kind of skinny, right? And these people have high metabolisms, and they have trouble. They don't usually have much trouble with fat. Although, I know I coach a few of you, you still have trouble with fat when you don't eat well, but they have more problems with putting on muscle. So they have difficulty gaining muscle, but they don't really struggle with like a lot of excess fat. And then there's mesomorphs, which is the athletic type. They kind of like are in the between. They can make their body go more muscular, or they can also lean out relatively easy. They're kind of like in the middle, right? I'm a mesomorph. Like I can actually gain muscle not quite quickly. It takes a lot of hard work, but I can move that direction, but I can also get lean both ways. That is like partially a genetic thing, right? That is your natural body's set point. And it's to understand that if you have a certain body type, you still can accomplish potentially a lean or sculpted or shredded body. It may just take a lot more hard work for you than for someone that may have a different body type. And that is just what it is. For example, someone who is an endomorph, they probably have to work really hard to bring down that fat percentage in their body and really control it. But if they do, they could be like just as sculpted, just as ripped. And that's why you just have to make sure you have like good programming, good workouts, a good nutrition, and you still can get there, right? So understanding that. But also the other thing is, since we're talking about like the natural, you want to look sculpted, you want to have nice like physique, all of this is also understanding your natural set point of your fat percentage is kind of where your body will like to lean to stay. So a great example is between Oshone and me. Oshone, even at her leanest, I think with her competition, she got to 16. We got her to 16% or maybe 15, but she never lost her period. I was just so impressed with that. As soon as I dropped below 17%, I would lose my period, like completely, right? And it's like, it was just her set point was just her body really liked low fat. Like it just was like her body really functioned well at that point. And so this is kind of why I say like you really want to like when you're deciding like how you want to look, you want to also consider factors of your body. If you're an endomorph, it may be okay for you to stay a slightly higher, but lean and athletic looking at 22, 23% body fat, and then if you're an ectomorph, you might always be at 18% body fat. I feel like I'm talking to one of you here, you might always be 18% body fat, and that's just how you are, right? So it's kind of like making sure you're realistic at understanding your body is really, really important, right? So the second thing is your fiber types, okay? So muscle fibers, there's different types of muscle fibers as well, which is genetically predetermined as well. So let's talk about muscle fibers. Your muscle fibers is made up of bundles of individual muscle fibers called myocytes. And in the myocytes, there is like many myofibrils, like they're kind of like long strands, okay? And these myofibrils, inside of them have actin and myosin, these filaments that go like this, right? And that's how you can contract your muscle. That's how you can lift something. That's how you can like move your body, because these things are always pulling against each other, the actin and myosin. So how fast your actin and myosin contract is how they classify different fiber types. And that's how you're going to have type 1 fibers versus type 2 fibers. Type 1 fibers are slow twitch fibers, and type 2 fibers are fast twitch fibers, right? Now, let's talk about these different fiber types, because everybody is genetically given different types of fiber ratio of type 1 to type 2 fibers, okay? So type 1 fibers are smaller in size. They're typically more endurance-based. They have a little bit lower force, and they're kind of fatigue resistant. They just can go on and on and on and on and on and on, okay? So you're somebody who's like, I can last forever. You know, someone said, was it you, Vivian? You're a camel? You said, or maybe you just like, you can go a long time without drinking water or something like that. But yeah, like you can go on and on and on and on. It means that your predominance is very high in type 1 fibers. And you'll see this usually in like a lot of the marathon runners, people who are in a lot of endurance sports. They have a lot of type 1 fibers. And so if you have more type 1 fibers, they're smaller. And so you typically are going to look a little bit like leaner, and it's not going to be maybe as easy to build a lot of size on you, although you can. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. Now, there's type 2 fibers, and type 2 fibers are more strength and power fibers, and they are larger in size. However, they have lower amounts of like mitochondria, myoglobin, because they don't use aerobic capacity as much. They use anaerobic a lot more. And these type 2 fibers produce greater force all at once. They're more powerful. They move faster. And sometimes if you watch people work out, you can see it too. Some people who move very slow, they probably have a little bit of a type 1 fiber tendency. People who move fast and like spurty, like very spurt-like, it has more type 2 fiber tendency in them, okay? Now, in your type 2 fibers, you have type 2A and type 2B fibers as well, which will actually split into 2 categories. Your type 2A is your intermediate muscle fibers. It's a mix of your type 1 and type 2B. So it's kind of like the perfect combination in between. If you have a type 2A type of fiber, you actually are sort of good at your endurance things, but you're also good at strength things. And those fibers utilize both an aerobic system and an anaerobic system. They use both systems together. You know, I would say I'm like that. I'm a type 2A because I really like cardio, but I really like strength. So and I can go on for a long time. So I have a really like interesting mix of it, but it can also come from my training, which I'm going to talk about that, because the way you train can change some of these fiber types. Now there's type 2B fibers. Now type 2B fibers produce the most force. These are like power lifters, Olympic lifters, sprinters who are going to be really fast right out of the gate. These people are super powerful, but they also die out really fast. So type 2B fibers have basically, it uses all its ATP and it's done, right? It's like, so sometimes if you look at your boyfriends or your husband and you guys, hey, how come he can't last as long in terms of like at the gym? I mean, so like, like it's often because men are given more usual type 2B fibers, just so you guys know. So you can go and you're just going at it. And then you're like, why is he so tired? I don't understand. That's why, right? Because they have a lot more force, a lot more power, but they don't have the ability to keep going. And so the type of fibers you have is genetically predetermined. So if you have more tendency of type 2 fibers, you will have a slightly larger muscle base. If you have more tendency of type 1 fibers, you will have more tendency of leaner muscles and maybe a little bit harder to pop your muscles out, right? So being aware of your own muscle fiber is also really important, okay? Now, before I continue, let me ask you, how many of you actually believe, listening to me, that which fibers do you believe you have? Now you have all of them. Just know you have a mixture of all of them, but what are you predominantly in? Are you a type 1 fiber gal, a type 2A A fiber gal or a type 2B? Put it below, because this will tell you something about your body and maybe the reason that, you look a certain way or you like or prefer certain activities. The other thing that you can think about is like your activity tendency. If you don't like cardio, let's just say you're like, oh, I hate cardio. I don't like cardio. I know one of my clients is on here right now that we talked about this. Then you probably have a tendency to have more type 2 fibers. Oshone, amazing. Type 2 fibers. Girl has type 2 fibers, let me tell you. And so she never liked any endurance thing I gave her, any cardio. She would just like give me the death glare. She did not like it at all, right? So it wasn't that Oshone was trying to be lazy. She just didn't have the fibers at that point to really support that. So she really liked little spurts of things, but she didn't like me making her do a lot more of type 1 fiber things. And because she has a predominance in type 2 fibers, which by the way, in research, and this is still limited, I know that this is not conclusive. I know they're still doing research on this. There has been research papers done on African descent, typically are shown in their analysis of your muscle fibers to have a predominance of type 2 fibers. And thus why I really love the look of a lot of you that are African descent. Amazing like physiques, like your type 2 fibers just pop like there's no tomorrow, right? So now let's talk a little bit like how you can develop or transition this. So is your fiber types able to be affected? So they do a lot of research development. It's always more research is coming up, right? So what they found is that sedentary individuals actually have 50-50. So people who don't really do much, they were looking at their fibers. And so they have like 50% type 1 fibers and 50% type 2 fibers. But where the change started to happen is in how an athlete trained. So of course, they found in sprinters really high predominance of type 2B, like 70 to 75% of their fibers were type 2B. And the marathon runners, 70 to 80% of their muscles were type 1 fibers, right? So they started to see like a big shift in the way the people were training that produced type 1 and type 2 situations. So like I said, lots of research is still being done here, but generally right now, what the research is saying is that you cannot shift a type 1 fiber to a type 2 fiber. The percentage of your type 1, type 2 is actually genetically predetermined. However, you can shift a type 2 fiber from a type 2A to a type 2B because it's the same fiber class. It's kind of like that fat cells, brown fat, white fat, and beige fat. If you remember, I talked about this. So you can't turn a type 1 fiber to a type 2 fiber, but the type 2A fibers you do have, if you are a predominantly type 1 tendency, if you train it the right way and you train it a certain methodology, like Vivian, I just gave her feedback in her workouts about certain things I want her to do, is to start to train the type 2B fiber predominance to change the 2A to 2B. So you can do that. It's going to take a certain type of training methodology to do that. And it's going to be different for everybody because some people don't need that. Some people may already have lots of type 2 in them. But if you have difficulty building muscle or you tend to be an endurance person, you have very lean muscles and you have trouble popping yourself, then you need really good training methodology to know how to do it, to be able to get this development of the type 2 to transition, because type 2A is a combination, right? Type 2A basically has type 1 within it as well as type 2B. So it's just like you're shifting a little bit of what is already in there, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so that is your fiber type, also genetically predetermined. So you have to also tailor your training to that. And that's why I often talk about like, be careful of doing just any program out there, of getting a YouTube, just getting a $20 program. Like sometimes especially if you're getting results, awesome. You might be a mesomorph, you might be low percentage body fat, and you have everything working for you, type 2B fibers in your body, and you're getting awesome results. We're super happy for you. And like, that's awesome, because you probably look jacked all the time, which we all know somebody like that. But if you aren't looking like that, that just means you have other tendencies in your body, but doesn't mean you can't get there. But you do need more specific types of training to accomplish this. So not just cookie cutting a program from just anyone, because you have to have someone who understands your body, that programs for your body, to then help you sculpt the body that you need, right? So now the third thing is your fiber type, is your fiber length, okay? This is also genetically predetermined, okay? So your fiber length is how long is your point of origin to point of insertion of each of your muscle, how long length of it is, okay? So that's also determined genetically. So the best way to describe this is like, look at a tall person. A tall person typically looks really tall and lean, right? Really tall and lean, because they're tall and everything gets kind of pulled out. If you look at a shorter person, and if they have a little bit, maybe just excess weight on them, they'll look rounder, and they'll look rounder, not so straight, correct? So your muscles is actually the same. So if you are gifted with long fibers, maybe potentially more type 1 fibers, then you just are always going to look long and lean, maybe like a dancer or something like that. You always have long, lean kind of muscles. But if you are gifted with shorter fibers and you build some size into them, right, then you'll pop way faster, because, you pop out, like someone who's pregnant, who's shorter, they pop faster than someone who's tall, right? It's like you'll pop faster. So, but yeah, in terms of the fiber length, like if I was to stand beside Oshone ever and we were both in competition, if you look at our shoulder length, we have a very big difference in our shoulder length. Her origin starts here and her insertion ends within like about this much. My origin starts here and it doesn't end till the bottom here. I have a really long, I'm like probably 2 inches more than Oshone's shoulder line, or 1.5 inch more. So I have a very long fiber length. So it takes a lot more for me to be able to pop it to a same look as her. Whereas when she didn't actually lift that heavy, like when we first started, she was lifting 15 pounds for shoulder presses and she wasn't lifting any heavier than that. She had a very good pop in her shoulders, right? So her fiber length is short, but robust, and it can just boom. So everything in her body is kind of a shorter kind of tendency, and she has type 2 fibers, right? So why do I tell you all of this? Is because I want people to understand that there is genetic differences, and to be realistic with what you expect of yourself, because you have to become the best you. And that's really the point of why I'm bringing this up, because you're probably never going to change your fiber length. Your fiber types, you could change your type 2As to 2Bs potentially with the right training, but there's just some things that you might not be able to change. And it's to make sure we focus on how to be the best and most sculpted body that there is. I'm not going to look like Oshone or like this next person on stage. I want to look like the best me, right? So in the same way that all of you, are working towards a sculpted body. Yes, number one, low percentage body fat is very key. Build really good muscle base. And 3, recognize your body's potential and find someone who knows about this on how to maximize your potential. Because if your potential is there but is not maximized, you're not going to get there, especially if you struggle with more of these outer like kind of these other ones. You are more of a ectomorph or endomorph, if you are more type 1 fibers versus type 2 fibers, if you are, right? So it's just making sure that you guys recognize that. And with everything that you're given, there's pros and cons, right? The pros of you maybe not having maybe a mesomorphic body is you have to be better with your nutrition. That's not a bad thing. That's awesome. You got to work hard on your nutrition. Maybe somebody who is more type 1 fiber dominant versus type 2B, they may have to work harder to be able to build their muscle to look somewhat similar to a type B fiber. But that's awesome. It develops excellent work ethic, and it develops actual better understanding of how you build muscle, So I think it's just like making sure the thought process is proper. And one more thing I'll say is that when you are looking at building yourself to be the most sculpted you're realistic when you are looking at pictures, right? If you are looking at pictures, choose something that is within what is reasonable for your body, right? If you're looking at someone whose torso is twice as long as yours, no, you're not going to have abs that look like her, right? If you choose someone who has long legs and that the way her legs are, but you don't have long legs, you have to choose pictures that is about being the best you. Right? Does that make sense? I'm hoping this is making sense to all of the ladies. I just feel like I had such a long conversation with one of my other clients about being realistic about what you can achieve for your potential. And I feel like it's about being excited about being I'm so excited to be the most sculpted me and the most fit me and the most muscles on me. I'm excited for me, right? And I'm hoping that you guys understand that and then also become aware of your own potential or work with a coach who knows these things. Usually if I'm working with a client, I already know what tendencies they are. And that's how I start to program for them, or that's how I decide on food and macros, and because I know what they're like. And that's kind of why I say having someone who really understands you is really, really important, right? So let's kind of summarize this, and I have a few more points to make. You want to find the right training method, you want to have right programming, you want to have right nutrition, and you want to have a right dialing method in order to really get the best sculpted look for your body. So I want to ask you, when you listen to those things, I'm going to repeat it. Are you missing any one of these things that is stopping you from having the sculpted muscles that you want? So right training method, do you have that? If you don't, put it below. Right programming. Okay. Right programming is not the same as training method. Training method is how you do the move, right? Do you have the right technique? So right training method, right programming, right nutrition, and right dialing method in terms of your nutrition for protein, carbs, and fat. Are you missing any one of those? So put it below. Awesome. So now let's talk about a final few factors in regards to how someone looks really sculpted and all of this. Okay. So some final factors to consider is posing. Okay. I'm going to bring this up because I got sent pictures by all these lovely clients of mine. And they're like, I want my arms to look like her. I want my shoulders to look like her. And they were like, I want to do that all without flexing. And I'm like, you know that in the picture they're flexing, right? So why I bring this up is because bodybuilding is an aesthetic sport. Okay. The entire industry is built in how to make a beautiful body, create the right aesthetics, and pose in a way that looks the most aesthetically pleasing, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's no different than I learned powerlifting right now. The entire sport of powerlifting is how much weight can you get off that floor using every possible technique in the world, right? So every sport has its own element. But what we have to recognize is that because bodybuilding is an aesthetic sport, like dance is an aesthetic art, why do we turn our bodies a certain way? Why do dancers use their arms a certain way? Why do we move a certain way? Because we're trying to emphasize a certain aesthetic element, right? It's nothing wrong with it. But yet we have to recognize that if you're looking at a picture and you see someone with really awesome shoulders or arms, usually they're posing, and it's okay. So, you need to pose as well if you want to have that muscle. Don't expect to be like, I need to look like that even when I'm like sleeping, right? Like, I think that's really unrealistic. And there is some people who can do that. But those are anomalies who have extremely low fat percentage that are natural to their body. But for the majority of people, it's posing, and nothing wrong with posing. It's just that if you want to see your bicep curl, then flex your bicep. If you want to see your shoulders, then flex your shoulders. If you want to see your back, then flex your back, right? Like it's like almost unrealistic for people to be like, I need to look like that all the time without like even at rest and everything. And I'm like, and this is a conversation I had, which is no. Do you know how much training I did posing for my competition show? Do you know how much training I coached Oshone, all my competitors on posing? Because 50% of your mark is in posing, right? And so again, what I'm trying, and Rosalinda, you will know this because you are a competitor. A lot of your marks came from posing. It's not just like you stand there and then suddenly you just look like that. You have to pose. And so don't get carried away sometimes when you're like, whoa, like look at those arms. I just want to have arms completely like that. And then you think that your natural relaxed state of your arm has to look like that person in the magazine. Does that make sense? So you got to be realistic about it. And that's why though I share it with you guys, because if I want to see muscle definition on you, I ask you guys to flex for me, right? Tell you to send me photos of things that you need to show me because I need to see a flexed photo, right? So posing is really, really important. And if you really like the art of posing, there is an art to it. It's beautiful. If you can know how to pose things, you can look amazing. Your physique looks amazing. You can highlight your glute a certain way. You can highlight your back muscles a certain way. Like at rest, like if I was to say, like my back muscle at my most shredded phase, it's not like if I like was relaxed and not doing anything. I mean, you'll see that it's like lean and you can still see muscle, but I would actually have to like flex my muscle, and then you would see boom, 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 right? Everything pop. So again, being very realistic about what you mean when you tell me or you say to your coach, I want to pop all my muscles. What does that actually mean, right? So being realistic about that. And then another thing is, in terms of like a final shredding phase, if you are going to compete or you're working with someone who helps you get to your leanest state for photos or things like that, then it's about dialing in your nutrition with understanding how to play with your carbs, and then you dial it in with understanding how to play with your water and your electrolytes. Those final things are very, very, very tricky, and you usually want to work with someone who knows what to do, because obviously you're playing with the very, very delicate things in your body at that point, which is why usually you don't do it unless someone is really gunning to go into competition. So it's like, in terms of like, if you want to get extremely low in percentage body fat and you want to have every muscle pop, you want to see your six pack, all of that is low percentage fat, but also knowing how to shred yourself properly with different manipulations, with your nutrition, with your water, and then obviously posing it properly. Because if you don't dial it right and you pose not properly, you could lose your competition. And that's what you'll hear a lot of competitors say. Like they brought in their best physique, but their posing sucked. And that's why they lost their competition, because they couldn't bring out their muscle by posing it. So again, to wrap it up, to help you understand, okay, you have low percentage body fat. If you want to look really sculpted, you have to have big enough muscle fiber size, which is, good programming and right method of training. And then you also have genetic factors you have to consider, and make sure you have a program or training methodology suitable for your body, not just some cookie cutter program that you grabbed off of YouTube, okay? And not off of someone who doesn't have your body type, right? And then the last thing is then recognizing that the final like cherry on top of how people can look really good, have very sculpted muscles and photos and things like that is the last bit, the posing, the water, the electrolytes, the carb manipulation, the shredding phase is really complex, and it's very unnatural for your body. So it's something you don't want to do it all the time. You hopefully will do it for just a competition or for a certain purpose, but then recognizing that it's probably healthier to just stay in a more realistic, sustainable stage for you. Okay. And if you guys really learned something from this, I know this was a super popular live, put what you learned the most below. And again, if you are wondering about our programs, I want you to put program below, or if you're wanting to actually learn about inflammation, how to bring that down, then put 21 below, and we will reach out to you. Also, I know some of you asked about my YouTube channel because we released this over there. I will put my YouTube channel in the comments below once we're off. You do want to subscribe to there because we bring these lives over, but then I bring a lot of my other lives snippets in there. So right now, and on TikTok, I know some of you are following me on TikTok right now. So you get information a bit faster because I have little clips about like what cortisol does to your body, what insulin does to your body. And so I know these lives are really long and not everybody watches it all. So if you like those other formats, like 1 minute long or 5 to 10 minute long formats, then you do want to subscribe to YouTube or TikTok, because then a lot of those videos appear over there as well. Okay. So yeah, put one thing that you learned. I would love to know what you learned from this, because this was like a really exciting topic for a lot of you. And I can't wait to hear what you took out of today's live. All right. Thank you for joining me, and always a pleasure serving all of you. And I will see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fierce and Fit Mentor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the follow button on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, or wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. If something in this episode resonated with you, please leave a review or share it with a friend who'd love it too. Your support means the world and helps us reach more amazing women like you. Until next time, stay fierce, stay fit, and let's keep building your most powerful self.